You are watching the press preview, a first look at what's on the front pages as they arrive. It's time to see what's making the headlines with the CEO of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha. They'll be with us from now until just before midnight. So let's see what's on some of those front pages for you now. Well, Judgment Day is here. That's how the Metro describes the start of court hearings after the riots of the past week, with a self-employed builder, one of the first in court for assaulting an emergency worker in Rotherham. The Telegraph, meanwhile, leads with a warning from the Director of Public Prosecutions that some rioters could face terrorism charges. In the Mail, Stephen Parkinson also expresses deep concern at the fact that children as young as 11 took part in the violence. According to the Mirror, the Home Secretary says those convicted could face up to 10 years hard labour in prison. The Times says that thousands of police officers are now ready in case any more rioting breaks out. The Guardian reports that immigration lawyers have been warned to take extra safety measures in case they're targeted by the far right. The US edition of the Financial Times leads with Kamala Harris choosing Minnesota Governor Tim Walz as her vice presidential running mate in the hope that he will attract working-class votes. And finally, The Star has a story about pets suffering from wind, not their own, but that of their owners. Needless to say, we will not be looking at that story. Reminder that by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you watch us. And we are joined tonight by the CEO of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha. Good to see you both. We're going to start with the story that's been first and foremost for the last few days, and these are the riots. The Metro, first of all, saying that Judgment Day is here, following on from Sir Keir Starmer saying that these people found guilty will face the full force of the law. Sonia.
Yes, that's right. So the first person who took part in these riots to have been convicted is the sort of focus of this Metro front page story. He's a builder, a man called Joshua Simpson. He took part in those scenes that we saw in front of the Holiday Inn in Rotherham that has housed asylum seekers. There was considerable unrest around that. There were rioters attacking the hotel with bricks, etc. He has been convicted of assaulting an emergency worker. That's a police officer. The Metro reports that he kicked a riot shield and, in doing so, forced it back onto the police officer and injured the police officer. So he will be sentenced on August the 27th. He will be kept in custody until then. He's been convicted of the crime. And this is number one. But what politicians have been telling us, what ministers have been telling us is we can expect to see a lot more of these convictions in the coming days. There have been 400 people arrested as a result of these far-right riots and thuggery that we've seen across the country. And ministers have told us that they will be using, the courts and the judicial system. The full force of the law will be applied. Obviously, we have a process around that. It's not for ministers, but this is the first person who's experienced that. And some of the other stories that you've heard, actually, from rioters who have appeared, there was one man who kind of started crying when he was in the dock. And it just goes to show, and this happened after the 2011 riots as well, justice is meted out very swiftly in these circumstances. People aren't hanging around, and these are people who might have been expected to be going on holiday in late August, and actually they're going to be in a prison cell.
And Mark, many people will be keenly looking at the length of sentences that will be handed out. This particular individual won't be sentenced until the 27th of August, but all eyes will be on that, won't they?
Yes, and exactly as Sonia says, this brings to mind the very swift and extensive reaction that we saw after the 2011 riots, which I think is the most comparable, different in various ways, but the most comparable in terms of certainly the range of parts of the country in which this kind of violent disorder is taking place. The police have arrested 400 people so far, but they're also quite openly saying that this is the start of them ploughing through the amount of evidence they've got. What's remarkable, I think, is firstly, we live in an age in which there's, infinitely more camera phones and video and streaming and everything than there was in, say, 2011. a remarkable number of people seem to have live-streamed their own crimes or been aware they're on a live stream while they've been conducting violent fray and attacking police officers and trying to set fire to vehicles and buildings and so on. And I think that's one of the things. One of the difficulties of this situation is the sheer stupidity of some of the people attracted to behave like this makes it hard to dissuade them rationally. But the sheer stupidity of them also means that some of them have frankly handed themselves on a plate to the authorities, and the authorities can't tolerate this. They will be cracking down extremely hard.
And as you say, the police still going through footage, so we can expect more arrests. The Mirror front page, their headline, 10 years hard labour, a government gets tough as fears grow over fresh violence.
Yeah, Mark and I were actually a bit confused about this headline at first, because at first we thought it was a Mirror implying that, people are going to be sent off to a Labour camp for 10 years, but actually we figured it out together, that what they mean is, Labour are being tough, and it's a pun. It's just a pun that we didn't get immediately.
I briefly felt quite positive. I thought they're sending them off to break rocks for 10 years. That sounds like a great idea. Then I realised they were saying that Labour's being really hard.
Yes, I actually was going to say, but they don't do that in this country.
Yeah, which shows that the fact that the three of us found it quite confusing shows it is a confusing headline.
If Yvette Cooper's looking for ideas, she might want a focus group how many people think that when she reads the front page.
And obviously, sentencing is not done by politicians. It's done by judges, and it will be done in line with sentencing guidelines. But I'm sure that Yvette Cooper had she knows those sentencing guidelines inside out as a Home Secretary. So, again, it's about the messaging, because we're going to come on to talk about the fact that there is still people stirring up. There is still misinformation flying around. There is still people on the far right trying to whip up hatred and whip up further action over the coming nights. And this is politicians, really coming down hard and saying full force of the law, but also these are really serious crimes, and you may be looking at up to 10 years, 10 years of a custodial sentence. So, it will be in line with what the sentencing guidelines say, but it is reminding people, because I suspect that what's been going on here is that there are some people who, have really acted to foment this. And then, like we saw with the 2011 riots, there are some people who kind of see an opportunity for some thuggery and kind of go and join in. And, there were a lot of people who regretted very strongly what they did in 2011 because they found their lives ruined, essentially, with prison sentences. So I think this is partly politicians giving out the message as well, do not get involved in this criminal behaviour.
And also the other message they're keen to get out, the Home Secretary saying that cowardly thugs do not represent Britain.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And I think that that's one of the things where you've seen, from my point of view, a disturbing number and range of people say in response to these riots, again, as happened in the 2011 riots, albeit from a very different wing of politics, of saying, of course this is reprehensible, but ... as if, and then going on to try and suggest that these riots point to any underlying idea, or that they represent any strata of British society, whether it's a matter of social class or group identity or race. It doesn't. The fact is, the vast majority, in fact, if you look at the polling, I'd struggle to find an opinion which unites social group, political perspective, age, region of the UK, as much as the British public's loathing for riot. If you look at the polling about how they want this punished, they want it punished harder, they want it stopped immediately. And actually, there's some polling out today that suggests there's a bit of discontent and not only told to the government about whether they're being tough enough, so they can go further, and they should.
Sonia, to the Telegraph, and we read that Stephen Parkinson, the DPP, is suggesting that terror charges could be employed for some of these that were found to be rioting. Yeah,
absolutely. And obviously there's a very specific definition of what constitutes terrorism, and it really is around, criminal activity and violence where there is an ideology that is driving it, whether it's a far-right ideology, whether it's Islamist ideology, whether it's incel ideology and hatred of women, for example. So, of course, I think it's good that he's come out and said this, but of course prosecutors will be looking at it really carefully, because it is
But he's actually saying that it's already being used in one case.
Oh, I see. Oh, I missed that bit. OK, well, thank you for that clarification. But it's very clear anyway, when you look at what is driving this, some of the stuff on social media, it absolutely is driven by far-right racist ideology. And you can see that actually through some of the racist and Islamophobic and anti-asylum seeker slogans that people are chanting when they're taking part in this violence. What's quite interesting is that the story also references Jonathan Hall, KC, who is, as well as being a senior lawyer, is the government's independent advisor or independent reviewer, I think it is, on terrorism and terrorism legislation. And he's just urging, I think, a note of caution around politicians standing up and labelling this as terrorism as it's going on. I think probably because it's a live situation and, politicians, obviously, they need to come down on this very hard, but you also don't want to provide fuel for... You don't want to kind of incite things further, give the far-right things that they can sort of hold up further. So that's just a slight note, but he's talking specifically about politicians, not about prosecutors looking at this and saying, is this terrorism, is it not? Is it driven by a far-right ideology? And if it is, as you say, there's one case already. I'm sure some people will be facing terrorism charges, not just charges around the violence.
Yeah, I mean, that note of caution from Jonathan Hall, he's saying that, you'll end up with a finger-pointing exercise with one group start saying, well, if you're calling these people terrorists, then you have to call the others terrorists as well, and that's problematic.
Well, it depends. I mean, of course, if the answer in that finger-pointing exercise is that actually both or multiple groups being pointed out are all conducting themselves in a terrorist way, then that's a reasonable question to ask. I mean, I think there's a number of ways to look at this. First is there is some evidence, even available to us publicly as journalists, never mind what's available to the police and to prosecutors, that there are relatively well-resourced and well-organised people who are doing their best in order to stir up and to try to coordinate some of this. There are also people who are trying to exacerbate it in terms of information or disinformation campaigns, and I think that I'm sure that will be being investigated right now as to who it is who is doing that through a variety. There's a lot of talk about popular social media figures, but actually informal and peer-to-peer and private group social media seems to be playing quite a large part in some of this. Who those people are, how they're doing it and why is well worth looking into. But also the fact is, if this is violent extremism intended to force the state or politicians or the British people to change their views, to change the law, to change public policy, then it would fit the definition of terrorism. And that's the other thing. We've got to be out to deter people tomorrow or tonight from going out to riot by looking at what can happen to not just ruining their holidays but ruining their lives. But we've also got to deter people in the far right and beyond from thinking that violent extremism is going to ever be accepted in this country. And there's a variety of ways in which I think we've been teetering around the boundaries of that in multiple causes in the last couple of years. And a clear warning and example to encourage the others on that would be well advised.
Sonia, let's move to The Guardian. This really very disturbing story regarding immigration lawyers who basically do not feel safe going to work and think that they are going to be the target of violence.
Yeah, and there's a reason for that, which is that there is evidence that people on the far right, organisers on the far right, have been circulating a list of up to 60 immigration advice centres, which are commonly staffed by lawyers, on Telegram, which is a sort of private messaging app, although it also has channels that can be used for broadcasting. And it's quite hard to control because it's encoded. It's like WhatsApp. And this is extremely worrying. And it's all focused on Wednesday night. You've just got to hope that it doesn't come to pass. But obviously the police are taking it incredibly seriously. And it's a very scary time to be an immigration lawyer, as well as, to be somebody who worships in a mosque, for example, or to be an asylum seeker living in a hotel. And, the story does note the fact that several prominent lawyers have, commented on the fact that the government, government ministers, Conservative ministers, singled out lawyers, lefty lawyers in inverted commas, for targeting, for criticism, when they were talking about the Rwanda plan, for example, and legal challenges to deportations. and not even Rwanda, but deportations to people's home countries. And, obviously you can't draw a direct line from a comment like that to this sort of organisation on the far right. But I do think some of these politicians should reflect, because these lawyers are doing an important job. Everyone in the legal system, has the right to defence, has the right to advice from a lawyer, and to criticise lawyers for doing their job from mainstream politicians is really troubling.
No, I mean, the fact they're being warned to take extra security measures and stay away from work is extremely worrying.
Absolutely, and I think this is one of the things I was saying about where there is evidence of coordination, where there's evidence of, one of the reasons this comes to light, of course, is that, yes, there are arrests and people's devices are accessed. Even encrypted channels, once you have access to one end of it, you can see what's being sent around. But also, I would be very surprised if a wide variety of these groups are not being extremely closely scrutinised by the security services as well, for the reason that a lot of this is terrorism. I do think it's worth us looking also, we've talked a bit in the past about the PREVENT programme, which is meant to work out how to dissuade and break the cycle of violent extremism and radicalisation on a number of different fronts. Neo-Nazi extremism on the far right, Islamist extremism, various aspects of green environmental direct action. That doesn't seem to be working as a programme. I think there's going to be not for this week, but in the coming months, there needs to be a serious conversation about that, because it's obviously not successfully deflating the things it's meant to be addressing.
Yeah, definitely will be an area that will be looked at in the future, as you say. Mark and Sonia, thank you very much for the moment. We're going to take a break. Coming up, Harris picks impressive Walt as running mate reads the front page of The Guardian. We'll have more on this and the rest of the stories dominating the front pages. And we'll be live in Pennsylvania, where Kamala Harris is expected to address a rally shortly.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that?
Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Pride.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
Okay, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me!
Yeah, okay.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers. We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. You are watching Sky News, where we are expecting Kamala Harris to address this rally in Philadelphia with her new pick. Her new pick is Tim Walz, the Minnesota governor, who is to address the crowd alongside Kamala Harris this evening. We're expecting her, and our tagline there says shortly. It's hard to define how long shortly is, but at any moment we're expecting her to arrive and address the crowd. So we'll go back to that as it happens. But in the meantime, still with me, CEO of the Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the Observer's chief leader writer, Sonia Sodha. And let's talk about Kamala Harris and her pick of a running mate today, seemingly going down very well with the Democrats, Sonia.
Yeah, that's right. It's going down well with the Democrats. Obviously, as with any American general election, the question is how will it go down with swing voters? I think it's, a choice on the one hand. A lot of Democrats are very happy with it. As you said, he's considered to be a very charismatic, popular politician. He's got a great backstory. He was a teacher, a geography high school teacher in Minnesota. He was also spent 24 years serving the Army National Guard. And some people think he will go down very well with the sort of voters that Biden went down well. So swing voters, those sorts of voters. I guess the question mark is a lot of people thought that she was going to pick the Pennsylvania governor, Josh Shapiro, because that would have essentially guaranteed pretty much Pennsylvania's all-important electoral college votes. And, presidents don't win general elections in the US without winning a big swing state like Pennsylvania. So it's an interesting choice in that sense. They clearly made a calculation that he's got broad appeal, and it's broad enough to outweigh the specific benefits of Josh Shapiro. But, it's an interesting choice.
And look where they're going to be speaking tonight. They're not speaking in Minnesota, they're speaking in Pennsylvania for exactly this reason. But if we know one thing about American politics, it's that everything is tested and cross-tested and focus groups and message tested and polled again. And it'll be very, very interesting to see exactly how they intend to do this. Is he going to be there to effectively bolster her as presidential candidate against Trump? Or is he there to square off against J.D. Vance in a VP versus VP kind of contest? I've got to say, it's good news for Tims. My brother's a Tim. You don't see a lot of Tims on the global stage. This could be the world's most powerful Tim Walz. I mean, so that in itself is a bit of a change.
He's been described as sort of folksy and plain talking, and has come to sort of prominence because of this put down of Republicans describing them as just weird, which has got a lot of traction in the States.
It has got a lot of traction. He's also been used particularly... So it's really interesting. I heard some Americans talking about him earlier, and they were saying, well, actually, before a few weeks ago, actually, most Americans outside of Minnesota probably wouldn't have heard of him. He hasn't been that big on the national stage. But interestingly, the Harris campaign have been using him, well, clearly, because they thought he might be a VP candidate. But so, for example, he's become more well-known, for example, for attacking J.D. Vance. And talking about J.D. Vance, I think it was J.D. Vance that he might have described as weird as well.
Weird, yes.
Yeah, exactly. It's just weird. So, that's obviously got him a bit of attention. And, the time will tell, as with all things, because obviously the key question for this ticket is how does it go down with the voters they've got to attract in swing states? They've clearly got some polling, but as Mark says, that has informed their choice.
Yeah.
But I think that kind of weird idea, the fact is voters don't think of themselves as weird. They tend to think of themselves as kind of pretty normal, pretty average, and pretty much typical example of everybody. And that's how most people tend to think of themselves, by and large, being pretty mainstream. I think if they can draw that distinction, then in that sense they can start to turn Trump's Trumpness against him, and that could be quite hard for him to escape.
OK, Mark and Sonia, thank you very much. Coming up next on Sky News at 11, dozens of rioters had their day in court amid warnings the disorder is now beyond normal law and order. The Prime Minister promises communities will be safe, and will be live in Pennsylvania, where Kamala Harris is expected to address a rally any minute now.